Thank you very much. It's the first time I give a talk being cabled with two microphones, so I hope this is going to work well. So I'm very excited to be here at PETS and to present the joint work with my PhD student, Yu Pu, on measuring the value and explaining the value of interdependent privacy in app adoption context. So a number of studies have already told us and informed us that users are concerned about the usage of information in third-party contexts. And clearly this is something that is relevant also in the social app economies, such as we exhibit them on Facebook or also in mobile contexts. So, however, what we also observe there is that not only data about the individual that is making the sharing decision is becoming available to these third-party app providers, but also data about others. And this is essentially the topic of our talk, and that is what we describe as interdependent privacy. So we want to also stress at this point that most of our work is about situations that are not collaborative in nature. So here, one individual makes decisions about data from others. So let me illustrate that on an example which fits to our context. Let's assume there's an individual called Mark. He is interested in a particular application that has certain permissions associated with it. On the one hand, there are permissions that affect Mark himself. On the other hand, there are permissions about other individuals. If Mark decides to install this particular application, then he will not only share his own information, but also the photos and the birthday information about all his friends, which in Mark's case would be thousands of different individuals. So this information then is transferred outside of the context of the platform provider, whether that is a social network or a mobile platform. And in this case, for example, it could be different online game providers. So when we talk about interdependent privacy, we first try to nail the concept down a little bit with a theoretical foundation. And what helps us there is to look into behavioral economic theory. And in that community, one already has established for a long time this concept of other regarding preferences, which essentially means that you're not only looking at your own utility, but also internalizing to various different degrees the utility of other individuals. So in our context, this would mean that you also try to reason about whether the other individuals would be accepting of your sharing decision of the information in the app adoption context. So if you're more interested in this literature on distributive preferences, you can, for example, look at behavioral economics papers in the context of ultimatum games or dictator games. It's quite interesting. So building on this literature, there have been a number of models being proposed, first by Bishok and Chia in 2013 on interdependent privacy, and then we followed this up with our own study. However, what we always heard about our papers were, well, how does it actually stand up to the empirics? So how much do people actually really care about other people's privacy in practice? So this motivated us to complement our economic modeling work also then with a behavioral study to actually fill these models with life. So the concrete research questions that we ask here are then clearly associated with this behavioral concepts. On the one hand, we want to first establish, well, to which degree do really individuals value the information of others in this kind of sharing decision and social app adoption context. A somewhat related question that we also try to answer is whether important contextual factors also then influence this kind of valuation. And finally, the core part of the paper to be presented here at PETS is to also try to explain the valuations as exhibited by the individuals in the app adoption scenario. So the first part of the question we can answer by using methodology that has been established over 50 years ago in the marketing context. It's called conjoint analysis, and what it actually allows us to do is to make users or participants or consumers make decisions about complex product bundles that consist out of different attributes. And in the specific methodology that we're using, we're asking people to rank essentially different expressions of a social app with different kind of attributes. And after these ranking decisions have been taken place, the methodology of conjoint analysis allows us then to deconstruct these different rankings and come up with numerical path of utilities for these different attributes and the associated levels. Now, this allows us then, essentially by picking useful attributes and associated levels to answer then essentially the question that we are after. So more concretely, the 4 dimensions that are relevant in our context are price, which helps us then to translate the other 3 dimensions also in the domain of monetary evaluations. The second dimension is network popularity, which is kind of a friend internal measure of network effects. And the 2 central measures in our studies are own privacy, how much you care about the sharing of your own information, and friends' privacy, so to which degree you care about the sharing of other individuals that are associated with you. And let's drill a little bit deeper into these 2 attributes. Within these attributes, we have different levels. On the first level, essentially no information is shared about yourself or about others. In the second level, there's basic information shared about yourself or about others. On the third level, there's very comprehensive information shared about you or about others. Here I brought up the exact explanation of how we explain basic and full profile information in the context of friends information. All right, so having essentially established these different attributes, we can then essentially go into the ranking task. And there are very different approaches on how that can be actually visualized. The online survey package which we used allows for essentially the following ranking interface, where you can essentially drag and drop these different expressions of these different apps with associated attributes and levels, so that eventually it then resembles your preference over these different versions. Right? So this is essentially our approach to answer the first research question. The second research question was about context. And what we are doing here is essentially manipulating the instructions document that we gave to individuals before they came into the ranking task. And we wanted to have essentially a contextual manipulation that seems to be quite relevant for the context of interdependent privacy. So on the one hand, what we are then doing in this particular scenario is to essentially manipulate whether the data collection about users' friends has actually any impact on the functionality of the app. So in treatment number 1, we essentially describe a scenario where the collection of data is irrelevant to the purpose of the app. In scenario number 2, we have the outcome where actually the data really has an impact on the functionality of the app. We included that in this instruction with these 2 statements. So keep in mind, again, this is explicitly targeting the friends' information, not your own information. All right? So all the results that you see are based on the study that we actually then deployed on Mechanical Turk. If you want to see all the details about how we deployed it, the demographics, etc., please take a look at the research paper. So before I move on to the third research question, I'll take a stop here and present you some results about the first 2 research questions regarding the valuation and the impact on this contextual variation. So what we see here are 2 graphs. The left-hand graph relates to treatment number 1, to the irrelevant data collection. On the right side, we have relevant data collection. We see 3 different rows of 3 bars each. The last bar is a bit small. I will come to that. We have here the basic information collected, both for individuals and for their friends. Right? And here the full profile information for individuals and for their friends. And in the middle, essentially, we see the difference between the 2, which highlights the more valuable information given to individuals. So what we see here is that, well, as expected, the more valuable and the more comprehensive the information becomes, right, the more the value increases, which is shown on the y-axis. Right? So that makes sense. What we are after is essentially establishing what happens actually in terms of the monetary value of interdependent privacy. And what we see here is essentially the same effect. So the more comprehensive the information becomes in both treatments, also there's a tendency that the value actually increases. The treatment effect for the 2 different context conditions is such that for basic profile information, full profile information, we indeed observe that individuals seem to be reluctant to share information in the irrelevant data context. So the value of the information is getting higher in this particular context, but it's not consistent across all these different scenarios. Now let's come to the last bar. So the first observation is that essentially the value for your own information is typically significantly higher than your value for all your friends' information. What we also did was to collect from the individuals a self-reported figure for how many friends they have on their favorite social networking site. And this is represented here essentially by the value for the average friends data. So what I can tell you is that for the full profile information in the scenario of irrelevant data collection, individuals exhibit a value of ½ a cent per individual. And the scenario for relevant data collection, sorry, here it's ½ a cent, and here it is 1 cent. Right? So it's relatively low. So not only do we have the situation that individuals value their own information than all the information of all their friends, but the difference, of course, becomes much more drastic if we actually control for the amount of information that is actually shared. So now to the last research question. Can we explain actually these findings with the help of additional research studies? What we did was to amend essentially our study with a comprehensive survey, which included a number of constructs which we believed would help us to explain these valuations for own privacy and privacy of others. So those include, for example, past privacy invasion experiences, privacy knowledge, the trust in the app providers, concern for own privacy, but also concern for others' privacy, and in particular relevant for interdependent privacy, a measure of social bonding, social capital, which essentially are these immaterial resources that we build through social interactions with others that help us either in the context of the social capital that we build with acquaintances to essentially broaden our mind, get access to other news resources, to other social circles, or in close-knit relationships, which can be described as bonding social capital, really get us access to direct help, or maybe even monetary resources, and so on and so forth. So essentially conducting a survey based on these constructs, we are then able to conduct a so-called structural equation modeling with an established software tool and to establish a model of how we believe these constructs relate to each other, and then also test to which degree actually these hypothesized relationships actually live up in practice. So our conceptual model is as follows. On the top path, we have the path for the concern of own privacy and then the valuation for own privacy. And this, we believe, is driven by experiences of past privacy invasion and individuals' trust in the app providers with which information is shared. In the bottom part, we are particularly interested whether these measures of social capital, so these immaterial resources that we in cumbersome ways to build together with our friends and acquaintances, actually do have an impact then on how concerned individuals are to invade the privacy of their friends, and then also this measure of friends' privacy value. And we also believe that essentially the treatment conditions have a moderating impact on this kind of relationship. So since I don't have so much time, I cannot go into detail in this hypothesis, but these are our results after running essentially our model estimation. We indeed find the top part of the model being supported. However, surprisingly, we do not find that actually these resources that are immaterially built up with your friends and acquaintances have a significant impact on this concern for other people's privacy and eventually friends' privacy value. We do, however, find for both concern dimensions that individuals' concern for his own data has an impact on the valuation, and concern for others has an impact on the valuation of others' data. Right? So we essentially can partially confirm this model. Some of these measures give us hope. So indeed, if we can elaborate and measure the concern that individuals have about others, sharing of data about others, and can from that extrapolate about their decisions, then this is already a step forward. So this brings me to the conclusions. So this is essentially the first comprehensive study to quantify and explain the value of interdependent privacy. However, in the specific context of app adoption decisions, users vastly underappreciate the amount of information shared about their friends, which leads essentially to this very, very low evaluations of the value of the data. Remember, this includes all your friends' photos, their birthday information, very comprehensive data about them. Nevertheless, it's valued in most of our scenarios at less than 1 cent. Right? So we could describe then individuals, whether or not they're reasonable about their own information, they're certainly privacy egoists when it comes to sharing decisions about their friends' data. And the final slide I have, when we're looking at the results with respect to the context, we have seen that indeed context seems to matter, but surprisingly little. So a lot of the results are really at the edge of statistical significance. And perhaps this mimics really what's going on in real life, that we see a lot of overprivileged apps that gain access to that. The explanatory model yields intuitive results, but some of them also actually motivate us to do a number of follow-up research studies, for example, to really establish what the role of social capital is in the context of interdependent privacy. Thank you.